Well, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Amy Rose. I am the Policy Director for Voices for Vermont's Children. Typically, when we host a lunchtime learning conversation, Voices begins by setting the stage with context. I am going to keep my introduction as short as possible, as our guests bring an incredible amount of expertise and leadership to this discussion. Today, we will be speaking about the intersection of foster care and SSI/SSDI benefits. When a person comes into state care and remains in state care for more than a short period of time, it is currently common practice for the state to use that individual's disability or survival benefits to fund their foster care experience. This is not unique to Vermont. Nationally, this injustice has been raised as an equity issue, and some states have begun to reverse course. Voices is pleased to host this conversation in order to gain a better understanding of the problem, and more importantly, name what options are available for solutions. Voices has leaned into our partners to learn more about our practice in Vermont. Overall, it seems as though there's a philosophical agreement that our current practice misaligns with our collective values. Our hope is, with this webinar, to elevate the issues so that we can create the political will to change course. Voices has deep gratitude for each of our presenters today. There was a great deal of interest in this topic, and therefore, we will be recording their presentations today. We will include the recorded portion of this conversation promptly at 1, but those who are available can stay on for questions and comments after that. It is my pleasure to introduce Lindsay Britt, who has been a fierce advocate for this issue and has brought the national experts on this call to our local conversations. Lindsay will then ask Amy, Kendall, Marissa, and Lauren to introduce themselves, and then we will hear from each of them in that order. Thank you.
Welcome, everyone. I'm really glad that we're here today talking about this important issue. Before we get started with our guest speakers, I wanted to share a little bit of background and some of the information that made me want to get involved in fixing this issue. As some of you may have read, NPR has reported that 10% of youth in foster care are entitled to Social Security benefits. And the payments are usually more than $700 per month, and this money is considered their property under federal law. The Social Security Administration recognizes that cases involving foster care are among the most sensitive that they encounter, and therefore it's essential that they do all they can to protect the rights of children. The Social Security Administration has established a specific and clear hierarchy regarding who can be a representative payee, which is a person who receives money on behalf of another. There are 8 options on the list, and the state is number 7. So what struck me is that Vermont hasn't been willing to show that it investigates and gives due process to the people who make up the first 6 options on that list. This is counter to the Social Security Administration's guidance that each case must be considered individually, and that agencies should contact other possible payees and document why they are or why they are not interested in being the representative payee for a youth in foster care. So what does that mean for children and youth in Vermont? The most egregious example that we have heard from our community was the statement that sometimes youth aren't made aware that they are entitled to these benefits, or that the decision has been made that it is in their best interest to use the funds for foster care. If errors were made in the process and there was an overpayment to the state from the Social Security Administration, the youth can actually receive a bill as an adult for that overpayment. It's unlikely that this happens frequently, but we have received confirmation that it does, and you can imagine that this is sort of insult to injury. It's my belief that as Vermonters, we should be asking the state to provide proof it is following Social Security Administration guidelines, as well as for evidence of how the state uses the money it takes from children. As a representative payee, the state takes on the role of fiduciary. They have been entrusted to act in a way that benefits the child, not the state. And yet it appears that youth receiving Social Security benefits are paying for their foster care placement. To me, this begs 2 questions. How is it fair for some children in foster care to be asked to pay when others are not? And how is it in the child's best interest to use their money to add to the state's coffers instead of for their own direct needs, such as buying a bike or a suitcase, funding music lessons, or purchasing any number of other items or services that they might need, but frequently go without? I know this topic can seem wonky and mired in bureaucracy, but it has real-world consequences for children and young adults. Today, we'll hear from someone with lived experience and also from national advocates who are helping to rectify this issue all over the country, from Maryland to Arizona, and hopefully soon here in Vermont. So without further ado, I'll ask Amy to introduce herself, then Kendall, and then Marissa, and then we'll go back to Amy for your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for welcoming us into this community. We at the Children's Advocacy Institute have been working on this issue for an awfully long time, and frankly, it shouldn't have taken this long to fix it, but it does sometimes, and we're still working on it. And I think the reason we're here today ultimately is we have an unprecedented moment where folks are interested, concerned, outraged, and the increasing awareness that we have across the country has created an appetite for change and for reform. So, again, Amy Harfeld, I'm an attorney. I'm the National Policy Director for the Children's Advocacy Institute, which is based at the University of San Diego School of Law. I work out of Washington, D.C., and I'm one of those actual native Washingtonians. I've worked in the child welfare space my whole career. I prosecuted cases for the city of New York for some time. I represented kids in their dependency hearings for some years at Legal Aid, and represented parents for some time who had been incarcerated and were trying to reunify with their kids when they came home. I've been in the federal policy space for about 15 years, advocating for a variety of issues impacting economic opportunities for transition age foster youth, among other things. And this is one of those issues that I've been focusing on. So I have a brief slideshow that just helps trigger what I have to say. I'm going to tell you it's a little legalistic, so I'll try to break this down, but mostly I want to make sure that the slide deck has some information and resources that you might want to go back to if you're working on this, and to make sure you see it as a resource and also as a place to find other resources, because we have a very extensive campaign website that we are developing with practitioners and policymakers and advocates and youth in mind. So with that, I'm going to share my screen and try to, I'm not going to do a full presentation mode, but I want to make sure that you can all see this. Thumbs up or yes?
Yes.
We can see it.
Okay, great. Okay, so actually Lindsay this is my email address, and that is a link to the homepage for the campaign that we're running on this, which has everything from state law to media coverage to tips for attorneys to federal reports and research to recordings of some young people's testimony, etc. So it's sort of a good resource to start with. Lindsay covered some of this, but just wanted to give an overall background, review what some of the rules are that should be followed now, talk about a report that we just released that should provide some fresh information and hopefully a little bit of maybe pride, shame, and pressure, depending on how your state did. And then after sort of going over that federal landscape, I'm going to turn it over to my partner in this work, Kendall, who's gonna take on a more focused approach to some of the state work that's happened. Big picture, what we know is about 10 to 12% right now of kids in foster care are eligible to or are receiving federal benefits of some sort or another. The majority are disabled youth, of qualifying disability. That depends from state to state, but as some of you know, disability benefits for children right now are $943 a month. Some children are receiving benefits because they have a parent who passed, or maybe both parents who passed, and that might be the reason they entered care. Their parents worked, they paid into their Social Security taxes just like we do. And when they pass, if there's no spouse that survives, the money goes to the children, and is really there to make sure that child has a stable present and some resources for a stable future. There are also veterans survivor benefits if a child loses a parent in active duty, and some other benefits as well, but we're mostly focused today on Social Security benefits. As Lindsay laid out, this is really a routine practice baked into the system in Vermont and elsewhere. Where kids come into care, they are automatically screened to see what assets or resources they might have that can help defray the state's expenses of caring for them. If there are any assets or resources found or benefits to be applied for, they go ahead and go after those benefits, and request that they themselves, the agency, get the checks. Now, the agency isn't supposed to get the checks. We'll talk about that in a bit. But that's a critical moment, because at that moment is the first time at which that child's due process rights were violated. If a public agency applies for public benefits on behalf of a minor, you have to inform that minor, their parent, and their attorney. You can't just go do it behind their backs. Most of this money is used theoretically to reimburse the state for the child's foster care, although in practicality, we often see the money deposited into general state revenue accounts, which Senator Warren recently was mad about this and said that it could be used for anything from paper clips to prisons, not always the child's actual foster care. This is a really baked in practice into state fiscal offices, and a lot of states use private for-profit data mining companies to help them do it. Somehow in the mix, it gets lost that the agency's duty and reason for existence, in theory, is to protect children and act in their best interest when they can't live at home. As you can see, this just violates the most basic social contract of our system, not to mention fiduciary obligations that agencies have when they're receiving the checks. And as all the disability folks on the call could probably articulate better than I can, it is questionable at best when a public agency pays for a service for all of a class of people, but then excludes one group from that class and treats them differently without any good reason to do so. So what we have a situation here is disabled kids are being charged for their foster care, but the agency is paying for nearly everybody else's. And there's never been a legitimate justification made for that. So this issue really came to light a few years ago during some excellent investigative reporting by NPR and the Marshall Project. I encourage you to take a look at that series. It's cited here, so you'll be able to find it on its own. But I found some of the short profiles they did of young people that were impacted. These are all young people in Alaska, actually. What they said about what happened and what the impact on them was. I'm not going to linger here for too long. So what would happen if kids actually got their benefits? What would they use them for? You know, what do we know about that? Well, most of what we know comes from data we got with other benefits going to youth aging out. For example, like pandemic benefits, checks that kids got during the pandemic. And what we do know shows that young people would use it for exactly what you would think they would want to use it for safe housing, to pay for or save for education, to make sure they had reliable transportation, for medical expenses that are not covered, and oftentimes for childcare if they're early parents. So Lindsay touched on this a little bit, but I think it bears repeating. SSA says one thing and is currently doing another, and we hope for change soon. SSA explicitly says cases involving foster care are the most sensitive cases we encounter. We have to do everything we can to protect children's rights. And it's also really important to note here that the 4E agency must meet with the foster youth beneficiary on a regular basis to ascertain their needs. Now, I don't know about you, but in the 20 years I've been working on this, I've never heard of that meeting happening. So that's a good place to start. This is the preference list that Lindsay referenced. SSA has a pretty clear delineation of who should be getting these checks on behalf of foster kids. And they have a good reason for that. The reason is that we know just from common sense that a person who's guarding somebody's assets, who cares about the child because they're related to them or they have a relationship with that child, is probably going to have a personal investment in making sure that money is well invested and well used, and to protect the interest of that child. You know, once monies go to agencies or organizations, you don't have that personal connection or somebody who actually cares for the child. And you see that in this list. The agency is literally supposed to be the payee of last resort. If there are no other options, yet in Vermont and other states, they're almost always the payee. The rules about how states are supposed to act when they're getting these checks, again, these are their duties: using and saving the money for the child's sole use and benefit, filing annual accounting reports about the use of funds, which obviously should be shared with the child and their attorney, reporting changes regarding the beneficiaries, and returning conserved funds. So the question is, when agencies are acting as fiduciaries and taking kids' money to deposit in their own accounts, how would you react to that if it was happening to your retirement benefits? If the person who's holding your retirement benefits or savings found a way to go into your account and take your checks every month and put it in their own account without ever having to tell you? Federal child welfare law is insufficient at the moment, but it is clear about a few things. We don't expect our kids to pay for their room and board. At least, you know, mine are still under 18, and we generously house them and clothe them. Foster kids don't have any duty to pay for their care. They didn't ask to be removed from their homes. They didn't ask to be placed in state custody. Federal law explicitly requires a state foster care agency to pay for the care of every child removed, not the care of every child except disabled kids, not the care of every child except somebody who might have survivor benefits coming to them because their parent passed away. Federal law requires that the agency pay for the cost of care for every child. Social Security says the foster care agencies have been dependable payees, but they shouldn't be appointed automatically, which is in fact what we see now. Congress actually did pass legislation in 2018 requiring that those overpayments you heard about at the beginning of this call, that children wouldn't be gone after for overpayments. So that's not supposed to be happening anymore under law, but that doesn't mean that we don't see it happening. So let me know if you're seeing cases of that. But what we know from that law is it wasn't complied with. And at this point, we have only about half of states sharing their data with SSA. Vermont does actually share its data. It's one of only about 20 states who do. But, you know, members of Congress on both sides of the aisle have said, we are concerned about reports that children's benefits are being used to help state budgets instead of children. So that's sort of the state of affairs. Kendall, I'm going to hand it over to you in just a couple of minutes. If that is this, are we sort of almost halfway now? Are we good? Okay. My organization has been doing a lot of work to change this in partnership with a lot of allies, including Kendall's organization and some other great folks, and a lot of state advocates and leaders like the folks who organized this call today. Prior to 2018, only one state in the country addressed this issue at all. And it took a little while. It was my state of Maryland. In the last 3 years, we have seen over half of states try to address this either by rulemaking, executive order, policy changes, voluntary stoppage of the practice, legislation that was introduced or passed, and a variety of other means. So we are at this moment where we have interest from a ton of states, from coast to coast, red states, blue states, purple states, and everything in the middle. We have Congress interested in this. We have the administration interested in this, and I'm optimistic that a fix is on its way. So you guys are the first ones in the country to actually see this report that we just released today. My organization researched the laws and policies of all 50 states and graded them A through F on whether they currently conserve and protect foster kids' benefits while they're in care. And it's not a report card you would want to bring home. I'll go over the grades in a second. I'm trying to start out with a positive here. This is sort of a laundry list of states that have done something, right? So the only great bills we've seen that cover all the right things are Arizona and Washington, which is what Kendall is going to cover. And then you can see we have a wide array of other states that have done something. And Kendall's going to get more into detail, but I just wanted to give you a sense of who's working on it. And I think Kendall will hit on the last piece here as well. So from a report card perspective, this is what it looks like. If it's red, you got an F. So things are not looking so good right now. I think the pace of interest and reform is not yet matching what's actually happening in states and what the laws are right now. But as you can see, the vast majority of states are still taking kids' benefits to some extent or another, or don't have laws to protect those assets. Our research only covered up to the end of October. So these were states that had taken some action of some form or another. It's not all comprehensive before that cutoff. And these are states that have pending legislation of varying degrees right now. So those are, we can't grade bills that have been introduced but not passed. And then these are states that have had bills previously introduced that either died and need to be reintroduced or reconsidered in some way. Okay, that's Vermont's grade. I won't go too much into that. I do encourage you to see some media reporting that was done on this a couple weeks ago. CBS Sunday Morning had a big feature on this, which was very helpful. And to point out that members of Congress on both sides of the aisle have aggressively identified this as an unjust, unfair practice that violates congressional intent and our most basic ethical duties to foster youth. And I'm going to hand it over. I'm going to skip the last few of mine before I've taken up too much time.
Hi, Amy, thank you for that. Also, I want to thank Amy and Lindsay just for this invitation. It's so generous and thoughtful the way you're going about your advocacy, and it's a real honor to present to you today. Kendall Seal, I'm a lawyer, lobbyist, strategist with the Center for the Rights of Abused Children. I'm the Vice President of Policy. And today, I'm going to be talking about three big things. One, the universe of impact, give you a snapshot of what we feel are key elements of a comprehensive reform, and then talk about some tools for action for you that I hope will be helpful. I've provided a link in the chat along with my contact information, so you can reach out or click on the link and look at the resources. As Amy shared, it was really the Marshall Project and NPR that story really elevated it, I think, to a national consciousness And when we talk about impact, what we're talking about, at least from that report, looked at around $165 million worth of benefits being taken from foster youth throughout the country. More recent reports, Child Trends, 42 states taking $251 million in third-party income. Now that third-party income includes, in addition to Social Security, child support, and other things, but just to really get a sense of what the impact of this, from our perspective, is stealing is. And, you know, while repugnant, taking children's benefits to pad bureaucracy's budgets have not been deemed conclusively illegal. And with backing from my organization, the Center, the state of Arizona became the first state to comprehensively respond to this outlandish practice. You may be asking or curious about the population in 40 to 80,000 youth around the country. But in terms of budgetary impact to child welfare agencies, we're talking about 3% of child welfare financing when discussing this reform. So in the grand scheme of things, at least for bureaucracy, a low percentage, but clearly a huge impact for individual youth in care who are losing out on these benefits. Now, states can and should be working collaboratively across all branches of government to fully fund their child welfare system. And you know, allowing the federal and state benefits to remain with and be used by the child, as Amy shared, right, provides so many opportunities to address their unmet needs. And for example, SSI program, $943. The average time in care, 17 and a half months. That amounts to over $16,000 that individual child would receive over the period of their time in care, which is really significant when you consider all the needs related to education, transportation, social emotional skills, really just establishing independence. And so I just want to start off there so you all understand really the national impact of this reform. Now, there are certain key elements when we talk about reform that you should be alerted to. If you go to the Preservation of Federal Benefits Toolkit, it actually has these listed out. I'm just going to net through them. The Arizona law have these components, namely, first of all, timely screening for eligibility. And this has become a big one. Screening initially when they come in or within 60 days of them being in care. And then also referrals for eligibility from attorneys and other sources, maybe the medical plan, to be certain that we're actually capturing all potentially eligible youth. That's been a part of our administrative advocacy in terms of implementation. 2, mandatory application of benefits. 3, notice to the child's legal representative, to family. 4, prohibiting the use of those funds to reimburse, quote that, for the cost of care, because it's just going in a budget and we really don't know, because the reporting is not great if it's being done at all. Provisions for conserving funds in the best interest of the child, and policy that's really clear on the representative payee search. In our implementation process, we've received feedback from Social Security's local office that often contradicts with their official guidance and even what their leadership is directed. And so I think that's a real area for attention in terms of advocacy when it comes to actual implementation. Now, the management of funds, protecting these accounts. 6, management of the funds to avoid state and federal asset limits, thinking about things like ABLE accounts. I know in Arizona, there's a personal needs account up to $2,000, and then above that, it goes into an ABLE account. 7, narrowly defining what those permissible uses are. I think it's important to clarify so we don't provide too much wiggle room in terms of bureaucracy trying to get creative with how to still reimburse itself. 8, periodic accounting to the child's legal representative. Financial literacy training, we believe to be key. And then 10, procedures for returning benefits to the child or another fiduciary need to be clear and transparent. as Amy shared, the landscape around the country really, well, it's true, right? As she indicated, 28 states and jurisdiction have taken some form of action across a broad spectrum, and I think that's key to protect the rights of foster youth and their benefits. So this is everything from orders to legislation, resolutions, directives, litigation even. But the actual kind of, I would point to a universe of around 12 states really that are requiring in a little bit more comprehensive. There are three jurisdictions that are doing comprehensive reform, right? We're talking about Arizona, we're talking about Oregon, and we're talking about Washington, D.C. Those are the three states, or sorry, jurisdictions that I would be looking at for comp reform. 9 other states. That's right, Vermont could be next. I love that. Hopeful comment. 9 states or jurisdictions, Maryland, Connecticut, Illinois, Nebraska, New Mexico, Washington, New York City, Philadelphia, Massachusetts, are also engaged in kind of reform activity in this space. There are other states that have kind of unique status: Alaska, Hawaii, California, New Jersey, and Florida to varying degrees, and 13 states altogether engaging in some form of legislative activity around this topic. One thing I'll tell you about it's interesting, is that I think the rubber meets the road, not just in getting the legislation done and getting it on the books or getting an executive order signed, but it's actually in monitoring the implementation process of these reforms. I think it takes a community of stakeholders who are thoughtful and engaged with their local child welfare agency to craft and reflect on what the implications are for children, and what they need in these policies versus what bureaucracies need out of these policies. Kind of, Amy already shared a bit about the kind of record data sharing rather that is not really happening. So I'm not going to spend too much time on that. In short, there's no accountability. And abused and neglected children are the ones that are paying the price for that failure of accountability. This process has been over 15 years in the making due to Amy and her leadership and the organization. There's been a lot of conversation. I think it's really time to act. And that feedback from Commissioner O'Malley that a rule is in the offing, I think is key. But we just can't press words that are given in testimony. We have to ensure that we're working collaboratively with them, that it's a meaningful rule that delivers on reform that children in care deserve. And it's not just Social Security. There are other federal benefits, the VA, railroad retirement. I mean, really, this is a national conversation about our values and if we value children and if we respect them. And I think this is what this reform area highlights. Now, if you go to the link on the website, you'll see model executive order for you to click on, preservation of federal benefits toolkit for primarily the kind of how-to on legislative activity. And then I don't want to miss the point on getting that stakeholder group who's ready to have dialogue and engagement with the child welfare agency in an ongoing basis after you secure reform in Vermont. I think that's just so very essential. States we're operating in, you saw a foster youth bill of rights in Colorado. There was some rights included in that bill of rights that were reformed. Kansas, it's not moving forward this year. Missouri, actually the vote out of committee in the Senate today, one more vote, and we're on the governor's desk there with a comprehensive reform modeled after Arizona. It's these little movements, but I think it's big change is on the way here, but we have to be persistent, and I really appreciate your time and attention to this topic.
Great. Thank you, Kendall and Amy, for that compelling overview. I'm going to pass it off to Marissa now to share a little bit about her expertise and experience with this issue.
Hello all, my name is Marissa Pike. I'm a foster care advocate As someone who spent 10 years working with the Massachusetts Department of Children and Families, I have made it my mission to change policies that not only negatively impacted me, but the children entering the system today. The Social Security bill that allows states to steal money from a vulnerable population is almost inhumane. Someone years back had the idea to take this money from innocent children in foster care as a way to help the states financially. Not only did this group of individuals that allowed this to originally happen not care about the future of children in foster care, but they continue to justify it by stating that they are in the state's custody and they have their most basic needs provided for. I am here today to share my journey with you all so that you understand the significance of this bill and the potential outcomes of these children if it is not changed. I started receiving Social Security benefits in the year 2002 for a disability of ADHD. During the time of my original eligibility, I was living with my mother. For reasons outside of my control, her mental health continued to decline, and she continued to show that she was unable to take care of me and my siblings. I was almost 12 when I entered the foster care system, so immediately the department became responsible for my finances. For the remainder of my childhood, I was bounced from home to home. I remember DCF coming every so often to tell me about an account that I had that needed to be spent down. Never was I made aware where this money came from or how much money it was, but I knew that I got to use it on things like iPads and iPods, movie tickets, and other items that later served me no purpose. It was not until I was 18 years old, 34 placements later, and homeless on the streets that I realized that I had been robbed by the state of Massachusetts. A confrontation with my sister that left me homeless after moving in with her led to a desperate plea for help from the Department of Transitional Assistance. My only hope that day was to get assistance with food. But I later found out that I had been receiving over $800 a month that was nowhere to be found. Not only had I been 18 for a couple of months, but the department was still receiving that money and had made no efforts to transfer it to me. To say I was shocked is an understatement. I felt betrayed and even more broken. After spending a couple of hours crying to the DTA worker, she assured me that she was going to help me change it. That lady indeed helped me that day. But unfortunately, $800 a month did not help fix my homelessness. I was homeless the original time for over 6 months, riding the bus all night, hoping and praying for a miracle, calling every person I could think of, begging for a place to sleep at night, and sitting in hospital cafeterias in order to complete my high school education. I continued to call the department daily, begging for assistance. I was often met with a, "We're working on it." The fact that the department continued to not prioritize me after they had stolen over $50,000 from me was baffling. I was 18 years old. I knew nothing about life, not at all prepared to navigate some of my most difficult challenges. To say I was angry is an understatement. I continued to question what I did to deserve what was happening to me. As the days continued to go on, I continued to question the meaning of life. In that moment, it was apparent that I was becoming a product of my circumstances. I remember being at a point where I was ready to give up, but somehow I was able to power through all the darkness and change my mindset. Luckily, the department eventually found me somewhere to go. As I continue to work on this bill, I'm often brought back to that point in my life. I'm proud today to say that I'm no longer angry and I'm no longer hurt, and I've made a life for myself that I'm proud of. But all of my success could never take away from the experiences I had to endure because the state had not put that money in an account to later be used to support me. Had I been informed of this money prior to me aging out, I would have planned for housing security. I would have ensured I had effective means of transportation and avoided the original food insecurity. I cannot go back and I cannot change my story, but as I've always stated, as long as my experience was not in vain, I have served my purpose. After securing housing, I went on to get my associates, my bachelor's, and I became an EMT working the North Shore 911 system in Massachusetts. I do a lot of community work and social justice reform, focusing on improving the lives of vulnerable individuals. I'm currently back in school, getting a bachelor's in nursing with the end goal of becoming a psychiatric nurse practitioner for children in foster care. But my greatest accomplishment was becoming a foster parent 10 months ago. I've taken in a total of 18 children. I currently have 3 teenagers. As a new foster parent, I have taken in children that are still currently encountering the same issue. Today, I am so beyond grateful that I weathered the storm. One of my favorite quotes is by Mark Twain. He says, "The 2 most important days in your life is the day you are born and the day that you find out why." I am here to use my story, my experience, and my passion to change policies like this one. So if you are already a part of a state that has changed it, I thank you from the bottom of my heart. And if you are a part of a state that is trying or considering it, I hope my story gives you fuel. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you so much, Marissa, for sharing all of your experience with us. And I believe that you've testified for bills in other states as well, right? So I just want to just pause for one more second and acknowledge all of the work that has gotten us to this point, and to thank Amy and Kendall and Marissa for really laying a solid foundation for the next steps in Vermont. And I want to transition over to Lauren, who has some data about what the current picture is in Vermont, and that may help us figure out our collective next steps. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. My name is Lauren Higby, child, youth, and family advocate. And I just wanted to thank Marissa very much for her words, and definitely nod that it does give me fuel to continue this work. That's a great way to put it. And so with that said, I'll share my screen so we can get a better picture of what it looks like in Vermont. Everyone see that?
Yep.
Okay, great. So before I look at the numbers, I wanted to give a little bit of, point out some limitations, things to consider. The numbers that I'm about to share was data our office received directly from DCF. I would say it's more of a point in time count or picture, as opposed to looking at the historical practices that DCF has done. And then when I divide out some demographic information that we requested, for gender identity, male, female were what were listed, and then for racial identity, white, non-Hispanic, Black, and unknown were the only categories listed as well. So just want to note that for language purposes. Let me see, because now I can't see that. So the scope in Vermont, based on the information we received from DCF, there we go. There are 41 children receiving SSA benefits, with the DCF being the payee. There are 18 children in DCF custody specifically receiving SSI benefits, with DCF as the payee. And then there are 13 children eligible for either benefit that are in process to restart or are deemed eligible. So for the purposes, I did include them in our overall picture in Vermont. So that leaves us with about 71 total number of children in DCF custody, with DCF listed or potentially listed as the payee for benefits. And so, as I stated before, the demographic categories are a little bit wonky and not all inclusive, but for the most part, there are 54% of males identified as the benefit, and then 46% females. 95% of children receiving benefits are white, non-Hispanic, 4% are Black, and then 1% the racial identity is unknown. I thought it was also important to use the information to really break it down by region. I don't have to go fully in depth here, but it does highlight different districts like Brattleboro, Burlington, and Rutland and Barre, who have a high number of youth, or a higher number of youth compared to other districts that have DCF listed as the payee. And then to talk about money. So from the information that we were provided, the benefits range from $37 to $1,377 per month. So the average is about $702. And so if we break that out continually, DCF is allocated approximately $38,000 per month as the payee, and then that translates to $457,000 approximately annually. And then I also included, as I stated before, those benefits that are still pending, which would add an additional approximate $150,000 in benefits to DCF as the payee. And so we're potentially looking at a value of over $606,000 per year that DCF is receiving as the payee from children's benefits. So that concludes my slides. And yes, the slides will be available. Now I forget how to stop sharing, so someone do that. There. And I think that transitions us to questions, comment section. Amy, is that right?
So there was a question from Nate in the comments that asks if that information that you shared can be shared with those children's advocates, attorneys, and GALs. Is it hard to find out the specific youth who are eligible for benefits?
I think that's part of the next steps. I don't think it would be hard to identify who those parties would be. And I know children's attorneys have expressed interest as well, like collectively. So that would be definitely possible for next steps.
Yeah, and I also wanted to flag two things on that. The first is we're hoping that some of you push in to get Vermont to introduce a great bill. It's happening all around you. There's no reason that Vermont shouldn't be addressing this. We have model bill language. Kendall has a wealth of experience, not only about how to make it happen, but how to shoot down all of the empty excuses that we have heard for not doing it. I've heard it all since the first federal bill was introduced on this in 2007. And I have yet to see or hear any legitimate justification for doing this. So we want to help you fix this statewide. However, until that happens, the fastest way in practical terms to get your client's money out of the state's hands and into their hands is to file immediately for somebody else to serve as the representative payee. There is a form that you fill out through the Social Security Administration. It's called the BK11. And find out from the child who is a trusted adult in your life who could manage this account. They don't have to be a financial whiz. They don't have to be, have some sort of advanced degree. They just have to be able to, have an account and trust and save the money for the young person until they age out. The U.S. Supreme Court has ruled on this in the past to a very limited degree, and it wasn't a great case. But one of the findings of the case was, in fact, that once those checks are going to somebody other than the state, they cannot get their paws on it. So in practical terms, that is sort of the fastest way to redirect that money to your client on the ground. Is to identify who that person is. Is it a parent? It can be a parent as long as there's no TPR. It could be a grandparent, a relative, fictive kin, somebody who's close to the child. Really, any caring adult in the child's life is preferable to the agency. And if you have any doubts about, am I 100% sure they're going to know how to do this and handle all the money just right? Nobody can guarantee that. But we know for sure what the state's doing with it, right? We know for sure that none of that money is going to be going to or used by the kids. And then the second thing I want to, no, it doesn't have to be done by a lawyer, but it might be helpful to check in with the child and make sure that they can help identify who they think in their life might be best suited to step into that role. One of the resources that I'm hoping I can share with Lauren and Lindsay and everyone after this is some of the great advocates I've worked with in Philly have developed a set sample motions and sample letters. And I advise you to go into court and file a motion to compel the agency to answer your questions. Have you applied for benefits on behalf of my client? Are you getting them? What are you doing with the money? How much is it? Can you explain how you're using the money in my client's best interest? Can you show me your accounting forms for how the money was used? And every time you do that, you educate the judges in the courtroom, the other attorneys in the courtroom, your colleagues, until this actually comes out of the darkness into the light. This practice has been allowed to perpetuate for so long because nobody knows it's happening. And so every opportunity there is for increased awareness and education, it's helped us move forward. So I just wanted to give some of those practical pointers.
Great, I appreciate that. And I know that you are headed out soon for another important event, but I wanted to, if we have about 8 minutes before we stop the recording, and we'll have some more time for discussion after that. But I was wondering, Amy, if you're willing, when we talked to you last, you had shared a little bit, it was more of a lived experience story of what brought you into this work, how you became aware of this issue. And if you're willing to share just a little bit about that, that would be helpful, I think.
Yeah, well, I'm going to date myself, but that's okay. One of my first clients when I started in this field, it was about 1999. It was in Manhattan. And I was representing a 17-year-old who I was assisting emancipating from foster care early. She was sort of done with care. She was a real go-getter. She was graduating from high school early. She'd been accepted to Hunter College. And she had everything like mapped out. In addition, she'd been working in her uncle's deli for years to earn some money to support her transition, because this is before extended foster care and a lot of the supports, thankfully, that we have now for young people who were aging out. And there was no extended foster care, back then. And she went to the bank one day and called me and said, "Ms. Hartfeld, something crazy just happened. I went to withdraw my tuition deposit. But the bank manager told me my account was frozen by the state of New York. And all that's in it is $2,000. And my tuition deposit is more than that. Can you fix this?" And I was like, "Of course I can fix this. That's nutty, right? I don't know what the heck is going on, but let me look into it and make it right for you." And, I looked into it to find out that what happened to my client was the way things go. They had applied for benefits when she came into care. They screened her, they applied for benefits, they received her checks, they spent her checks. They never told her or me or anybody else that she knew that this was happening. And to add insult to injury, when her caseworker came to find out that she had this savings account with $13,000 in it, somebody in the finance office of the department took notice and said, "Oh dear, we can't have that. If she has more than $2,000 in assets, she's going to lose her eligibility for SSI. We don't want her to lose her eligibility for SSI. So let's freeze her account over that $2,000 asset cap to preserve her eligibility." So that is what happened. And I went back and told my client, and she said, "Wait, are you telling me that the agency that's been theoretically looking out for me all this time was stealing from me the entire time? And now they're going to get in my way to go to college to preserve my eligibility for a benefit that I never knew I was getting and have never seen a dollar of?" And I said, "That appears to be the case." So she actually had to defer college for a semester. And that was her housing plan as well. So it was one of the worst experiences you can have as a lawyer, right? To have to look your client in the eye and tell them you can't help them, and that there's something really unfair happened, and that you can't get them out of it. So that was sort of what inspired me initially to get involved with this.
Great, thank you. As we wrap up, I just want to reflect a little bit on Marissa's story and the fact that she had lost $50,000, I think. And I don't want to put Marissa on the spot in particular, but I think for anybody who has transitioned into adulthood and tried to kind of figure out all of their needs, I just want to spend a minute kind of thinking about, like, what would you do if you were given like $50,000 like at that moment of stress? Like, how would you use that funding, and sort of what would that do to your stress level? And if anybody wants to, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I think for me, like at this point in my life, I'm renting, so I'm living in an apartment with all these foster kids. I would definitely buy a house. That would be my down payment, or I would pay. My first bachelor's DCF paid for, but the second one I'm paying out of pocket for. So I would use that money for that. But I think the first go around, if you had asked me this question when I was 18, a house would have been, somewhere to live would have been nice. I was taking the bus, like a car, or getting my license would have been nice. Yeah, I already know that I know there are bills to try to get that money back, but the chances of that happening is very slim. But $50,000 is a lot of money. So if I ever got that money back, I would definitely be using that to, enhance my life.
Thank you.
And what Marissa is referring to is, I mean, I think this is important to point out, of all of the young people I've spoken with who've had their benefits taken, and I will tell you guys, it's really difficult to identify young people to speak to this, because the whole nature of the practice is it's secretive. It's happening in back offices. Nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody's really making it, being transparent about it. So it's actually difficult. Most young people don't know that benefits were taken from them. But if you do speak to somebody and you ask what they would want prioritized in legislation, what I've heard a lot of is, I want my money back, right? Somebody took money from me that was mine and it wasn't fair, and they didn't give me any notice, and they should have to pay it back, which I think it's really hard to disagree with. So a model bill provides for retroactive refunds to foster youth who've had their benefits taken. And 2 states, Oregon and Minnesota, both have proposed bills that would accomplish that. They haven't moved yet. It's a pretty ambitious undertaking. But I think it's really important to point that out. Any of us who had, money that was taken improperly from an account, and somebody got caught doing it, I can't imagine any other civil or criminal context where you don't have to pay that money back. So I just wanted to put out that is sort of an ideal of what we would like a gold, I guess a platinum standard bill to include.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to end the recorded portion of this call with just deep gratitude again for Amy and Kendall and Lauren and Lindsay for bringing all this information to us today. If folks want to stay on, we'll have a little bit more time to kind of just debrief, and then we'll be sending the recording out along with slides in the near future.
And a big thank you to Marissa too.
And big thank you to Marissa.
I think she had to jump off, but thank you.
Yeah.